Welcome to another episode of the Life of Elvis podcast. I'm your host, Elvis, and this is the first episode of the, I would say, new season. A new season because, as you see, I've got new lights, new microphone, new podcast recording platform. So, yeah, we're looking forward to this. I've got really great guests on this podcast. And before we start, a small disclaimer. In this episode, we are not recommending the use of any kind of substance, legal or illegal. You are responsible for your own health, so do your own research. And what we are advocating for is further scientific research, the use of psychedelic substances under the supervision of a trained psychotherapist or psychoanalyst. And yeah, so that being said, I'd like to introduce our today's guest, Raul van der. Sorry, totally lost it.
Yeah, I can help you out.
Go on.
Roel bij de vaten.
Welcome. So he's got his own company to do with psilocybin and education. He's got a great team behind him. So let's get into this. Welcome on the podcast and tell us a bit more about yourself.
Thank you. Well, as I just said, my name is Roel. I'm 29 years old.
Sorry for butchering it.
No problem at all. And I am born and raised in the Netherlands. And I've been really interested in psychedelics, spirituality since a very young age. And this is what I do for a living now.
So tell us about your company. What do you do exactly?
So we actually just started last year. And we started as a retail web shop selling psilocybin-containing products. And alongside this, we are actively working to provide truthful and strong information about the topic. So on psychedelics in general, but also especially on psilocybin. And we're working towards providing coaching. And we also have a team of experts supporting our work. And so when visitors visit our website, they can, 1, find the products, 2, get the information they need. There's tons of information out there. And 3, if they are feeling like they need help or guidance, setting up a session or doing microdosing for the first time, they can get that help from one of the experts which we are working with. So that's basically what we are aiming for with Cosmic Truffles.
Sounds good. Just for those who don't know, psilocybin is the active psychedelic compound in mushrooms.
Exactly. Psilocybin is an active compound which you can find in mushrooms. There are various species, and the mushrooms are actually illegal in Holland, but the truffles, that's a different story. They are actually legal. What is a truffle? A truffle forms when the weather conditions aren't optimal outside for the mushroom to grow. Like the mushroom is actually only the productive organ of a whole lot of bigger system, which is called mycelium. This is a wiry structure beneath the soil. And when weather conditions aren't optimal, a small compact mass will form, and that will contain the psilocybin, and that's called the truffle.
Mm-hmm. So. Is there also any other difference between the actual mushrooms and truffles? Because every species of mushrooms has also other compounds, like L-cysteine or other stuff, and they're kind of unique. So is there also a difference between the fruiting body, the mushroom itself, and the truffles?
That's a really good question. I think, but that's just thinking. I'm not sure about that, but I think the compounds are approximately the same, because what a truffle is it is actually the fruiting body, but just waiting for the right time to pop out. Mm-hmm. Because usually in the natural circumstances, the truffle forms this compact mass and waits until the perfect moment to pop up and form the fruiting body. I think most of the alkaloids are consistent both in the fruiting body and in the truffle.
Interesting.
So, but that is an interesting question. Yeah.
Yeah. But it still doesn't make sense, like we talked about before. So the truffles are legal in Holland, but the mushroom itself is not, even though the active compound is literally the same.
Yeah, that's just unbelievable. They have been legal, but then there have been some incidents here with, not actually with psilocybin, but with heavy drinking and heavy drug use combined with psilocybin. And this incident caused a young person to die, which resulted in a complete ban on psilocybin mushrooms. And from that day on, only the truffles were allowed to sell, which is just mind blowing, because they're basically the same thing. So
yeah. Okay, so let's get a little bit, because I'm sure a lot of my guests who are watching this podcast don't know that much about psychedelics, and there's a lot of misconceptions. Let's be honest about this topic. So let's have a look first at the history of the use of, whether it's psilocybin, mushrooms, but also other, let's say, traditional psychedelics, whether it be DMT in one form or the other, or mescaline, etc. So what do you think is the earliest use of psychedelics in the history of humanity?
wow, that's a good question. Well, what I do know is that in the Sahara Desert, they have found a clear depiction of one of the most famous and iconic images in psychedelic history, which is called the Mushroom Man. It's about a cave painting where you clearly see a man holding mushrooms in his hands and having mushrooms all over his body, which is really interesting because the dating goes back at least 7 to maybe even 9,000 years old. So if we go back and look for the first signs of psychedelic use, this is one of the first really significant. So very interesting points to get started from.
Yeah, and that's just the evidence, and earliest evidence that we have. It might be, to be fair, even way before that, talking like 2 years before that, there certainly must have been some of our ancestors who either accidentally or maybe on purpose ingested these kind of mushrooms, whether it be on the fields of Africa back in the days.
Yeah, exactly. Now you're mentioning a really interesting theory. I'm sure you're familiar with Terence McKenna's work on
Stone Ape theory.
Yeah, exactly. And this is exactly what he describes as well. Like going back far and far more, we find the hunter-gatherers roaming the African desert, having cattle around, and they must have at some point being stumbled upon on mushrooms, which grow originally out of cow dung. So at some point they must have found them and probably eaten them. So that's really interesting as well. There's so many ideas and theories, both with really real evidence going back a long time, which really shows that psychedelic have played a significant role in the creation of culture and philosophy and those things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, at the end of the day, mushrooms have been around since a very long time. In fact, we are closer related to mushrooms than we are to plants.
Exactly.
Which is strange. They also breathe in oxygen just like we do, and even if you look at other animals, some of them, they actually seek out these kind of psychedelic mushrooms and just munch on them.
Yeah.
So definitely someone in our past, even when talking about Homo habilis, Homo erectus, they must have found out about these mushrooms. And for those who don't know, the stoned ape theory, basically what Terence Mckenna was saying, because some of our ancestors ingested these kinds of mushrooms, even just in a small dose, it could have given these primates, those who use these mushrooms, a bit of a evolutionary advantage, because when you ingest it, suddenly your vision is better, you become more creative, and possibly it could have accelerated the growth of our brains in the past.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because go on.
One of the things they find, I think Dr. Roland Griffith showed this, is that it really improves eyesight. So this must have given a great advantage in the evolutionary chain, and to have better eyesight, to spot things from a distance, and to improve upon their hunting skills and their gathering skills. And this might have played a role.
Yeah. And I was just about to say that there was also this period, which was like some say around 200,000 years, perhaps even a lot less, where our brains doubled in size, and we don't know how that could have happened.
Yeah, there's many things to say about that as well. That's really interesting. Evolution theory is great until you touch upon this subject, where there is just such big of a gap between some humankind, species of humans, and then our species of humans as we know them today.
Mm-hmm.
And there are so many different theories about how this could have happened. And psychedelics, the use of psychedelics is one of these theories. So, yeah, very interesting.
Yeah, just the evolution of our species is super interesting. It's not as linear as we thought, and everything just starts being pushed way, way back with every single finding.
Yeah, exactly. There
like,
are many.
Turns out modern humans have been around for like 300,000 years now.
Yeah, very interesting.
It's a long time.
Especially from the findings like the pyramids and Göbekli Tepe. You must have heard of these places as well, I think. We are just recently finding out that the datings of those places go way beyond what's described in our history books. It's just mind-blowing. It's an interesting time to be living in, and it's interesting to get to know more about all of these things and about our past.
Hopefully that's something I'm gonna get someone to talk about on this podcast too. Just lost ancient civilizations. So the last few months I've been actually looking into that too after a while, and it's super interesting.
Yeah, it is.
And speaking of which, it does make sense that civilization started a bit earlier than just 4,000 years before Christ with the Sumerians, because like I said, anatomically modern humans have been around for hundreds of thousands of years, and for the vast majority of the time they weren't doing anything, just hunting and gathering, even though they had pretty much almost the same brain capacity as we have.
Yeah,
does make sense.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, why the long wait?
Yeah, it really questions the linearity, like you said, the linearity of our history. And I think, at least in my opinion, from what I've known, from what I know and what I've seen and read about it, it's more like a cyclic thing where multiple eras have taken place and multiple civilizations could have been present on this earth. It's absolutely something we cannot rule out, and this is something regular and modern science is doing. It's ruling out these ideas and these thoughts where you go a little bit beyond the regular, the common narrative.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely a lot to be discovered over there.
Yeah, exactly.
So back to the psychedelics. Like you said, there were some of the cave paintings, which when someone looks at them, they're like, yeah, they are pretty psychedelic. It might have been that the use of these psychedelics was one of the reasons why we came up with art and language in the first place. Because, when you have these psychedelics and the visions you see, I mean, that's the most beautiful art you can ever see.
Yeah, exactly. Go and undertaking these kinds of experience, especially on the high end range, it's just mind blowing the experiences one can have on them. It's beyond words sometimes. I think going back, envisioning those people at the time taking psychedelics, this must have changed their entire worldview and their entire way of dealing with things. And I think they have played a significant role in many cultures for years and years. And there's a lot of evidence that backs this up. I mean, I just told about the cave painting found in Algeria in the Sahara Desert.
It does seem like every culture in the past, even now to be honest, they had some kind of psychedelic they've been using. And there's some evidence for it. Like, for example, in ancient Egypt, they knew about the lotus flower, which contained DMT.
Yeah,
right?
the blue lotus. Yeah, exactly. And you see a lot of references to mushrooms as well. A lot of depictions are showing mushrooms, a man presenting a mushroom to a woman. There are various depictions and engravings where you see the mushroom playing a significant role. And you find these things all over the world. Actually, there's a cave painting being found in Siberia, also depicting little mushroom men. You see little figures also holding mushrooms. And some people even have tried to identify the strain of mushrooms, and they seem to really represent the Amanita muscaria. And Amanita muscaria is one of the mushrooms you find in those regions, which has psychedelic and entheogenic capabilities. So, you find these depictions and references all over the place. There's a cave painting found in Spain where you just see clear depictions of mushrooms only, depicted on a row. This cave painting also dates back 5,000-6,000 years. So, and then there's the findings in the Amazon. One of the most, and this is a really beautiful finding, is the mushroom stones from Guatemala. I don't know if you heard about them.
Is it from the Mayans or?
Yeah, it is. When we go back 3,500 years approximately, you find these really interesting and really detailed sculptures of people with mushroom heads on, and there are stories about them being used in ceremonies for grinding up the mushrooms to a powder to make a brew out of it. So that's where it really gets more encoded also in the texts and the references to traditional use. And you find these references everywhere, which is really interesting to me because it clearly shows that psychedelics must have played a huge role in culture and in the way of the people.
Yeah, at this point we have to mention something that these cultures, even today, like for example the Shipibo tribe in the Amazonian rainforest or in other places, they don't use these kind of substances the same way as we do in the West these days. It's completely different story, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's something really important to mention. As we used to think of these substances as drugs, this is how they are classified. We can get into it a little bit later. But this has really stigmatized the subject. And when you go back and study these cultures, the Shipibos, which are still present, and many other cultures where they use these substances like traditionally, it's also always really about ceremony and about creating an environment where you can have this experience. And when they talk about these experiences, it's always about spirituality and consciousness and topics like that. So it's a whole different story, as we are here always relating those substances to having a good time and going to a party, but that's just a whole other game in those traditions. They're actually much more used for spiritual practice and the discovery of consciousness and the realms beyond the visible. That's how they sometimes describe it.
Yeah, like you say, they use it in a ceremony, which is usually led by someone experienced, with
Exactly.
the use someone who leads the experience, which is, in the indigenous tribes, it's usually the shaman.
Yeah. You find this all over the world, actually. Shamanism is assumably one of the first religions of the planet, where people practice spirituality and religion. And all over the world, you find this exact same setup where people having ceremonies with psychedelic substances are guided by a shaman, by a medicine man, who is taking them on a journey through what happens and occurs during a psychedelic experience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's much more about personal growth and the feeling of unity with nature and other people, which these kinds of experiences bring, which is the total opposite of what most people do in our culture these days.
Yeah, exactly. There have also these famous references in Mexico, for example. They call the mushrooms flesh or foods of the gods, which states that when you take the mushrooms, you visit and you are present amongst the gods and the realms of the gods. That's at least how they see it. And having experienced psychedelics, I can see what they talk about, because it so drastically changes your perception on the world that it places the world in a whole new light, and you experience things you cannot put simply into words. And I think this really interested ancient cultures, and psychedelics have been central in their practices clearly. So.
Mm-hmm. Even using the word religion or religious ceremony, it's not really on point when talking about this kind of stuff, isn't it? Because when you think of, or when other people think of religion, is what they usually think about as a religion is something that's secondhand information from a book or something someone told you, whether it's a priest or whoever.
Yeah, exactly.
But with this kind of ceremony, it's a bit different because you have actually a first-hand experience with the transcendental.
Exactly. Yeah. The religion and shamanism, they are completely different things. Even Buddhism, which is one of the most famous and well-known quote unquote religions, isn't actually a religion, but more like a spiritual practice. I like to call this spiritual practice, and I think that's where shamanism is all about: is spiritual practice, connecting with the plants and the trees and with the psychedelics. This is something our ancestors used to do, and there's still tribes and people on the planet who practice these things. You find tribes in Africa still who are actively working with high-dose psilocybin mushrooms, and I think one of the most known spiritual psychedelic practices are coming from the Amazon. A lot of people probably have heard about ayahuasca, and that's still really going on over there. So, and I think it's one of the last really active shamanistic culture still alive today. Like you mentioned the Shipibos, they are definitely one of them. And we still got some small groups, also of Native Americans who are still practicing spirituality with the San Pedro cactus. And I have to mention the San Pedro cactus contains mescaline, which is also a psychedelic substance. And you see a couple of cultures having these, doing these things still, but it's disappearing slowly, sadly.
Well, with ayahuasca, for example, I think it's quite the opposite, because now you got the tourism going there, and even with psychedelic mushrooms. I mean, since Terence and Mckenna published their book about how to grow magic mushrooms, it was suddenly like, people started growing it at home and stuff. Exactly. So it's a bit of like a psychedelic renaissance that we're going through.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. What I was referring to is the variety and the different cultures using the different kinds of substances like traditionally, but they're exactly psychedelic renaissance is a really nice word for it. We're really seeing things coming back to life. A good example of new age psychedelic use is coming from the early 40s, 50s, and 60s, where they actually did a lot of research on psilocybin mushrooms and LSD, which is the synthesized version of it. And
it's a synthesized version of hold on. Well, it's found in ergot, isn't it?
Yeah, in the Greek kykeon, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. It's a synthetic version of the lysergic acid.
Yeah,
but comparable to psilocybin.
It's a mold, isn't it? Ergot.
Yeah, it is a mold.
Yeah,
exactly. It's coming from grains, from harvested grains. So, and what we've seen in the 40s, 50s, and 60s is that LSD has really been researched. I think it's one of the most researched substances in psychiatry back then. And there were very promising results as well. One of the most studied topics is LSD and the treatment of alcohol abuse, with many great results. So there has been a time going back where this was alive and kicking, late until the late 60s, early 70s, where it got banned by President Nixon.
Yeah,
and I believe it was.
And many people don't know that even the founder of Alcoholics Anonymous, he actually used LSD for treatment. Very good results. Yeah,
exactly. And in psychiatry, it has been used for various different kinds of things, also for anxiety disorders and multiple stress related diseases. And research back then was already really moving. But then there was a time when it was also the time when the Vietnam War was going on. And we all know about the hippie culture, and that's where things got a little sideways. A lot of people started using them irresponsibly. Some did use them for good purposes, some not. But sadly, in 1971, the war on drugs was proclaimed, and all psychedelic substances got scheduled illegal, which is sad because that also put a ban on the research going on. And there was a lot of interesting research going on in the late 60s with a really promising future. So that was really sad.
Yeah, that's true. And now, decades later, like half a century later, we see that the war on drugs pretty much didn't accomplish anything whatsoever.
Yeah.
I mean, people are still taking whatever substances they can. In the States, you've got the huge opioid crisis these days.
Yeah, exactly.
So it
It
didn't
made it
accomplish
even
anything.
worse. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. It made it even worse, and yeah, it's crazy, the results of that. But luckily, over the last, I think already 15 years, we are really going through a psychedelic renaissance. I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Rick Strassman in the early 90s.
I wanted to bring it up just about now, because that's when the research started coming back, like
Yeah,
proper scientific research.
yeah, yeah,
Stopped in the early 70s, and then in the 90s, Rick Strassman started his DMT studies.
yeah, exactly. And then these results were really mind blowing, especially in the spiritual side of things. And then there was a bit of a break. Like after that study of Rick Strassman, there haven't been much work done on psychedelics. And I think it was 2006 when the first real study on psilocybin was reintroduced by, I thought it was Roland Griffith, and he was researching psilocybin and the effectiveness on multiple anxiety disorders as PTSS, PTSD, and things like that. And that's actually that got a really good results and really interesting reactions from the media as well. And from then on, we are actually doing great work. There's a lot of research being done since then, actually.
Yeah, that's true. There's a lot of good studies, even from like very prestigious universities like John Hopkins University.
Exactly. Yeah. They're really ahead of on this kind of research.
Yeah.
And the results are very promising for a future in the mental health care, at least for some substances. The most favorable is opposite from the 50s and 60s is now psilocybin. Psilocybin is now the most researched substance. And I think there is a future for it in the mental health care.
Now, before we get into that, I definitely want to talk about that because that's very, really important. We mentioned the Rick Strassman DMT studies. Now, when talking about psychedelics, most people tend to think of psychedelics like some kind of external substance, which is probably harmful, and we're going to get into that part too. But don't realize that the entire nature is drenched in some kind of psychedelic, whether it's DMT, psilocybin. DMT, for example, it's only 2 enzymatic steps away from tryptophan, which is an amino acid which is found literally everywhere in every organism.
Yeah, exactly.
And speaking of DMT, every mammal produces it in multiple organs in their body, including brains, and that includes humans as well.
Yeah, exactly. And you can find it in most plants, actually, and some plants more than others, but DMT is present in almost all plants and tree species. And going back in the history, our ancestors knew that, because if we go into DMT, there's a lot of reference as well to DMT use from the Egyptians and the acacia tree. And DMT has been on the interest and on the radar of the ancients as well. So, really interesting substance.
Yeah, at the end of it, that's the main ingredient in ayahuasca as well, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And then psilocybin itself is literally just like a orally active version of DMT.
Yeah, exactly.
It's chemically super similar.
Yeah, if you compare them and you see them on your screen, both are almost identical. They look very much the same. I believe psilocybin has one little thing added to it.
Yeah, I think it's an OH group.
Yeah, probably. Yeah. So, and they're actually very much similar, and that's very interesting too.
Yeah. So, like I said, it's not something that's entirely external to us. And in fact, there were some really interesting studies just like the last 2-3 years that turns out that DMT, for example, is found in really high levels in the human brain and has a certain function in there. It's not just dormant or not doing anything there, because it's found in similar levels as serotonin or dopamine in the brain. So it has to do something over there. It's mainly in the visual cortex, which is very interesting.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, DMT. There are many suggestions as well, and a lot of people say that it's produced by the pineal gland, and one of the biggest suggestions, and they are still not sure if this is true or not, but one of the biggest suggestions is that DMT plays a huge role in time of death. And some people state that DMT is released on the time of death, which will help. And this is all speculation, but which will help transfer and disconnect the body from what we call spirit or mind. And having experienced DMT myself, I can see where that is coming from. For the record, if you ingest DMT, it sort of produces a near-death experience. So there are some similarities between the substance and death and passing on. At least the mind separating from the body.
Yeah, it might be also that when someone has a spontaneous mystical experience, or even when meditating or doing some kind of other practice, that the reason why they have a transcendental experience is because of a release of DMT in the brain.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, very interesting chemical, and I think we're gonna find out a lot more in the upcoming years if we are allowed to research it.
Yeah, that's the thing. Politicians should stay out of the way of researching these kinds of things.
Yeah, exactly.
Because there's a lot to be found, and psychedelics are just a huge mystery that needs to be proper researched.
Exactly, and most interesting of all, it is so huge. It isn't just like it isn't like sports and eating is healthy for you. It is massive. It has been in the culture for thousands and thousands of years. You find references everywhere, and yeah, when you take a deep dive into psychedelics and the entheogenic experiences, it's massive. It's massive, and it's very much under researched and underappreciated. And I think we're gonna find out a lot of interesting stuff about it when we go deep into it and are allowed to research it.
Yeah, definitely. And when it comes to the impact it had on our civilization, and like we said, it might be the reason why we are so intelligent in the first place.
Yeah, exactly.
It might be the reason why we have language and art, which is a pretty huge deal.
Yeah, exactly.
And even just the way it influenced art and science over the course of, I'd just say, from the late 19th, early 20th century until now, it's massive, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. It is. There have been really interesting studies done on this exact topic as well, on the effect on creativity and creation of new things. And I believe it was 1966, where James Fadiman and and I forgot his name, but his companion, were doing research on the effects of LSD and mescaline on creative problem solving. So what they did is they invited a group of people which were intellectually very capable. One, for example, was an architect, and another was working with mathematics. And the findings were really interesting. during the test, they let people work on certain problems during the psychedelic experience, and the results were phenomenal. The architect came with amazing plans, and the mathematician, for example, found a solution. I don't know the details, but found a solution for something really problematic and really difficult to pass through. So the results of that specific research were amazing on creativity, problem solving, and new ways of approaching things, and really interesting, I think. And that's what I wanted to say. I think when used in the right and the most responsible way possible, it can create a whole different new world. It's amazing where it's capable of.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, when we look at even at like we mentioned the hippies in the 60s, and so I mean that was the only group where you had people literally of all skin colors just acting like, you know, there's no difference between us.
Yeah,
Back
exactly.
then, and also the music that came from that era,
Oh,
it
wow.
was so different and so much creativity coming,
Exactly.
which was definitely psychedelics had a huge influence on that. I mean, there's lots of musicians, you know, you can find reference in what they say about it, how it influenced their creativity.
Yeah, exactly. I think it's one of the biggest examples of how much of an impact these substances can have on culture. And sadly, it didn't end well.
It was a bit naive to start with back
e-
then.
exactly, and it was misused a lot as well. It was under researched, and the common folk weren't educated on these topics, and it went all too fast. It was going too fast, and that's why it was a bit messy. But it's a great example showing that it can have a great impact in a really, really short amount of time. And I think we're having the chance to do it again, but then responsible. And you see, since the work of Rick Strassman in the early 90s, and the research on psilocybin and various substances since mid 2000 are opening up a new world. And I think going forward carefully and with responsibility and the right educational measures, there's a great future for psychedelics being adopted and being used in our culture. And if that happens, I think things change for a lot of people. And we already see that here in Holland, for example. A lot of people are working with microdosing. That's something new, something popularized. For the record, a microdose is taking a sub-perceptual dose, so a dose which isn't...
You barely feel it.
Yeah, exactly. You can barely
It's not
feel
like you're tripping balls or something.
Yeah.
You know, it's like
exactly.
almost nothing.
When you take a microdose, it slightly uplifts the way you go about your day, but it's not like you're seeing things flying through the room and stuff like that.
Well, you don't really see that even when you're even on high doses. It's another big misconception.
It is.
I mean, I remember when I was at school, elementary school, and some of the stories were, now that I look back, they were just ridiculous.
Yeah.
You know, people saying they see dragons on the LSD, or what was it, pink dogs, stuff like that.
Pink elephants.
Or there was a story, Jesus Christ, about this guy who ate some mushrooms, actually, or some stems from psilocybin mushrooms, and apparently he came back home, so trying not to be seen, just went like right next to the wall, you know, even though the light was on, and his mom was standing right in front of him, and like, what are you doing? And then he ended up spitting on the walls and just went to bed. And it's like, that's irresponsible use of someone who doesn't know anything about these kind of substances and how to use them in a responsible way. And again, just spreading these kinds of stories is just ridiculous.
Yeah. exactly. Yeah, I think it's part of the way to keep people from it. There's a lot of stigma around the topic, and I think, and it's not only my thinking, because in the late 60s, early 70s, there was a lot of advertising, a lot of anti-drug advertising, especially on LSD. They were stating that it makes you crazy and go nuts for the rest of your life and things like that. They were spewing a whole lot of lies about the actual reality of what it's capable of doing. So I think that really has put a mark on how our parents and their parents have this perspective on drugs,
Mhm.
and this is also where we and most of us got our perspective from, and it isn't the right perspective. And
Yeah.
that's what I find interesting about exploring the history of psychedelics, because it really shows a different story. It really shows, like we mentioned in the beginning, that it is about personal growth, spiritual development, and connecting with things bigger than you. And I think that is something what psychedelics really can reveal and open up.
Mhm. At this point, we have to talk about the dangers of these kind of substances and how harmful they actually are. Because, like we said, we had all these stories about people jumping off buildings and doing crazy things and stuff like that. People going crazy after taking some LSD,
Yeah. So
and
there's a little side note to that. It's almost in any case with combined drug use or alcohol use. There hasn't been a case which were only stated to the use of a specific psychedelic.
Mhm.
So, yeah, crazy stories with twisted, uh, twisted way of looking at it.
Yeah, and even in some cases, when someone does end up with schizophrenia or some kind of other mental health disorder, they usually already had the predisposition to it and probably would have gotten the mental health disorder anyway at some point in their lives.
Exactly, exactly. Basically, what a psychedelic does or can do is bring up things which are already inside of you. For some people, this means ancient trauma from their past, from their youth. And for other people, this might be that they're sensitive for schizophrenia or something like that. And for those people, it can actually be harmful to take a high dose of a psychedelic, because it does bring up these kinds of things. And if you're not ready to deal with the consequences of that, it can be really traumatizing, especially under the wrong circumstances, not being guided by a professional or a facilitator.
Yeah, that's very true. Brings us to bad trips. 'Cause that's what something people are also afraid that, oh my God, I'm going to have a bad trip. Well, then, well, like you say, it just brings up stuff that's already in you,
Yeah,
which
exactly.
is basically spirituality in a nutshell, isn't it?
Exactly.
It's making the unconscious conscious. That's what spirituality really is.
Yeah,
We have to be ready for it. So if you don't know anything about psychedelics and then you suddenly take a huge dose and all this stuff just comes up from your subconscious, the past traumas, which a lot of people don't even know much about trauma, don't know they hold a lot of traumas themselves. And now when all that comes up, and um, also there's this reality shattering aspect of these substances, when all that comes crashing at you, it can be a lot.
yeah, it can be a lot. It can be really, really intense. For example, I was really young when I took my first psychedelic, and it was because of my knowledge of Buddhism and Hinduism, where I was already studying spirituality and other ways of thinking and other ways of exploring being conscious, that I actually managed to go through that experience and in a safe and responsible way. Otherwise, I can totally imagine how this really makes you have a really, really hard time, because the things you can encounter during an experience, uh, can be really, really mind-shattering, like you say. It can totally blow your view of the world and the way you experience yourself. And this, when not ready for it, can be traumatizing. So it's really important that if one decides to have a psychedelic experience, that he or she knows everything she could possibly know about it, and at least has some experience working with spirituality, meditation, mindfulness, or at least a little familiarity with different ways of awareness. I think that's really important.
Definitely, totally agree. And in fact, I had similar experience with this. I haven't spoken about this before, but I must say that psychedelics were probably the most transformative thing in my life. And having the psychedelic experience was, probably the most profound experience of my entire life. And whenever I, whenever I don't or haven't put into practice what I've learned from these experiences, that's when things didn't go that well in my life. Whenever I've learned from them, and when I integrate it into my life and live by it, that's when that makes a huge difference. So and they were very profound, very crazy in a way, but there's so much to learn from them. I mean, it's really incredible. So back to the dangers now. Physiologically speaking, there's also this notion that if you have like a tiny bit or once, some of this stuff, you're gonna get addicted to it, right?
Yeah, that's really funny. The addiction, the addiction part of psychedelics, it always makes me laugh because it's so funny. If there's one thing we can say about the psychedelic experience, and this goes for the high doses especially, is that if it's one thing, it is that it's anti-addictive. Because I haven't met anybody before who, after a strong psychedelic experience, immediately says, "I want to go again." It's mostly like, "Oh no, thank you, I'm fine for the months to come."
Yeah.
Most of the times, the experiences you have on these substances are so overpowering and so overwhelming that it gives food for thought. Most of the times for months after the experience.
Even years.
Even years, exactly. And this is responsible for, making you not want to have it very soon after experience. And even by scientific measures, it has been proven anti-addictive. Psilocybin has been proven anti-addictive as well for its own, for the substance itself, but also for treating other addictions. So psilocybin has been proven helpful with alcoholism, for example, but also with other heavy drug use, smoking, bad eating habits. So it has some very interesting anti-addictive properties to it.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention these studies. It was one of the John Hopkins studies with smoking, where was it 80% of the people who took psilocybin, it was like only 1 or 2 doses. They never went back to smoking.
Yeah, that's
It's
the most
remarkably high number.
Yeah, exactly. That's the most interesting thing of all, is that just out of 1 or 2 experiences, people completely change their way of living. And that goes for the most harsh and extreme addictions, like alcoholism can be really, really heavy to deal and to cope with, and really difficult to break. But actually, a lot of people have managed to overcome their alcohol addiction by having 1 or 2 really intense psychedelic experiences, which is just mind-blowing if you compare that to the regular way of treatment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Big Pharma is not going to be happy about this. That's probably why they're not jumping on this, because it's like, if you can treat someone with 1 or 2 doses of something, there's not much money to be made out of it, compared to like SSRIs and all the other antidepressants and anti-anxiolytics, which you're supposed to take like every day for the rest of your life.
For the rest of your life, and thus damage.
Yeah, lots of side effects.
Yeah, exactly, and that's also really one of the things with psychedelics is it's cheap. It's cheap. You can, and that's what it's being proven more and more is. It helps people get off antidepressants and SSRIs, and I can only imagine that Big Pharma isn't too enthusiastic about these substances. So I think this is also one of the reasons we are still seeing very slow progress on research and on education.
Yeah, definitely. Even in terms of side effects, like you can't compare it with any commercial pharmaceuticals, these kinds of things. Because like, for example, we talk about psilocybin a lot on this podcast, and that is pretty much physiologically inert, apart from binding to the serotonin receptors.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't do anything in the body, and within like 17 hours, it's out of your system, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, within 48 hours, it's gone.
Yeah.
And when you eat the whole thing, for example, when you eat the mushroom, it's even healthy. There are some compounds and substances in them which are good for you. So it's really funny if you compare them to these really harsh and strong substances they are prescribing in the mental health space, which
or even
are
alcohol.
Yeah, or even alcohol. Alcohol is just it's just it's not good. It's one of the most damaging drugs of our society.
Yeah, super cheap, can get it everywhere.
Exactly.
It's super easy to kill yourself. I mean, if I drink an entire bottle of vodka or something, I'd be dead right now.
Yeah,
because I don't drink, so I have no tolerance.
Yeah.
And it's just so easy to do.
Exactly.
Whereas if I wanted to kill myself with mushrooms, I mean,
good luck.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
Yeah,
I would have to eat like a few kilograms of that stuff.
Yeah, I there have been studies on this. There one occasion they actually killed an elephant with LSD, but they just gave him.
Yeah, I've heard about it.
That was really horrible. But they gave him so much. But for example, with psilocybin, with the actual mushroom, you can't take possibly enough in to kill yourself. It's impossible. So that's really funny is to mention as well is that how hard you try, you're not going to kill yourself with psilocybin mushrooms, and with other psychedelics as well. They're really gentle on the body. And there are some people, by the way, who take these giant amounts of dried mushrooms.
Yeah, we did speak about Killing the E, for example.
Yeah.
Super knowledgeable guy, so you guys can check him out. Killing the E. Very interesting. He's not alive anymore, but yeah, but even he was like, he said he would take 20-30 grams of dried mushrooms, which is, again, compared to like a lethal dose of a few kilograms, it's just such a tiny fraction of the lethal dose.
Yeah, exactly. And he was taking a large amount in comparison with a normal dose. For a normal person like you and me, you have from 2 grams up to 5 grams dried, and with 5 grams dried, you have a really, really profound and strong experience. But this guy was actually taking up to 20, 30, and even 40 or 50 grams, which is just mind blowing. And like you said, a really interesting guy to view some lectures from.
Yeah, and we mentioned microdosing, but we haven't mentioned that. And this is also another thing that some people know about. Most people don't realize that in Silicon Valley, for example, in those companies that are there, pretty much all of the programmers, they all microdose because it gives them an advantage in what they do.
Yeah, exactly. Actually, psychedelics have been used in Silicon Valley a lot, like moderate doses, high doses, and indeed a lot of small doses, the microdoses. And they're being used for creative problem solving, for being more creative with their work and with the things they have to build. And a lot of people are coming out, more and more people are coming out with stories about having psychedelics integrated into their lifestyle. And I think if there's one thing our way, the way that our society works and operates, I think the high dose isn't always the best idea to get introduced again to psilocybin and psychedelics. So that's why I think that microdosing can be a real interest, because everybody can do it, and a lot of people are finding really are having really interesting benefits from doing it, and are experiencing personal growth and development, which is something we are quite desperately long for these days. So
Oh yeah, we really need that.
yeah, so I think if we go forward with the psychedelic renaissance and psychedelic adoption, I think microdosing is going to play a significant role, where it's yeah, quite easy on it's easy on you. It's not like you're having visions or ordinary states of consciousness, but it still supports you, and in a stretch over a stretch of period of time, it does change and make certain changes inside the way you view yourself, for example, or the way you deal with your partner, or those kinds of things.
Just an example came to my mind. The inventor of the PCR test, K. Mullis, he actually got a Nobel Prize for the invention of the PCR test, and he got the idea whilst on LSD.
Ah, that's funny. I didn't know that.
Yeah,
Oh,
it
that's
was
nice.
actually a really interesting guy. Supposedly, I've heard that he even might have had an alien abduction experience.
Wow.
Apparently, one time he was driving, I remember seeing a raccoon on the road, and the raccoon started talking to him. And then he ended up reading the book from Whitley Strieber, and at the same time, somehow his daughter was reading the same book, Communion, from Whitley Strieber, who was
Wow.
a famous abductee. So who knows? But anyway, LSD had a big impact on him.
Yeah.
And
Well,
just a side note, he didn't advocate the use of PCR tests the way it got used during the COVID pandemic. Just small side note.
yeah, a small one, pretty significant. Yes. But yeah, and a lot of prominent people are or have been using psychedelics, even in the government. That's something a lot of people don't really talk about. But going back into the 60s, the CIA and the government also worked a lot with psychedelic substances, trying to find ways to interrogate and to open up
Yeah, but
people.
that wasn't best to each other. It was more like how to misuse it for,
Exactly.
like you said, interrogation and mind control.
Yeah.
We had the infamous MK Ultra going on back then,
Yeah.
which was just Nazi level, horrible stuff.
Exactly. Yeah. And then on the positive side of things, a lot of people working on really important jobs are mentioning psychedelic use and psychedelic assistance, or a lot of them are doing microdosing, and some of them have experienced high doses. Yeah, we see more and more people coming out with these kinds of stories, and they're very interesting people as well.
Yeah, even Elon Musk. I'm not sure if you heard it recently. He got asked about, it was a few months ago, about what's his opinion on psychedelics, and he was like, well, I think generally speaking, people should be more open to psychedelics.
Yeah, I remember that. I've seen that clip.
Yeah. I think it's quite obvious that he also had some experiences with that stuff.
Yeah. You must have if you do what he does. Yeah. So, yeah, interesting. And also, like we mentioned before in one of our talks, that the founder of Apple was also interested in psychedelic use. And over the course, there have been a lot of people working with these medicine and with these substances, and getting a better person from it, getting to be a better person from it.
Yeah. So these days, a lot is being done when it comes to using it as a tool in psychotherapy. So tell me a bit more about it, because you've got a good team with you, experts who are working in this kind of way.
Yeah, exactly. There is, and especially here in Holland, more and more people are actually starting to work with psychedelic substances, especially with psilocybin, because that's the legal one over here in the form of Truffles. And here we see a big group of people with scientific knowledge. We have psychologists and people in the mental health care starting to really consider and work with these substances for treating things like PTSS. A really nice example is that they're working with the people who come back from Iraq, the veterans, the army veterans. A lot of them do suffer from PTSS, and psychedelics have been proven really useful and beneficial to those kind of people suffering from heavy trauma from things they have experienced, but also with cluster headaches. So we see a big movement growing here where more and more serious people are starting to pick it up and starting to implement it into their work field in the mental health care.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's very promising. And again, I can't state enough times how this kind of use is totally different from the way people perceive psychedelics and their use. It's like, as we both know, setting is crucial with these kind of things. So exactly. What kind of state your mind is and the environment in which you have this experience is going to change the experience so much.
Yeah, it almost completely determines how the experience will unfold. And this was actually something that really came forward in the research work in the 50s and 60s, in the work of Stanislav Graf and Richard Alpert. And Richard Alpert, but also Timothy Leary. They were really about creating a safe and responsible environment to have these experiences. Like you mentioned, with a lot of attention on your mental state of being, but also setting the place where you're in. It plays a huge role. And so this is something going back, and it's just sometimes still amazes me on how undereducated we are on this topic. And I think it's time that more and more people are open to it and discuss it in the way it's supposed to be discussed, like with attention to these important details, which make up for the complete experience. And I think going forward, this is really important, because the promise is great, but if we are going to be successful with it, totally depends on how we perceive and receive where it's about. And I think that's why I think that education is one of the most important aspects of psychedelics. It's really important at this point that people get more educated and get more honest education, so that we finally learn about their use and about what they actually are.
Well, I think we're pretty far off of figuring out what they are. But yeah, definitely when it comes to like figuring out responsible ways of using it,
Exactly.
you get in there. I mean, I always say when I have a conversation with someone about this, I try to imagine the difference between someone taking, let's say, some LSD or something on a party where it's lots of noise or overstimulating lights, dodgy friends, alcohol, that kind of environment, compared to using it for a very specific reason. For example, spirituality, overcoming trauma, whether it's you're alone at home in silent darkness, or with a psychotherapist or a shaman. It's a totally different experience.
Exactly. Yeah. They're so different, and I don't want to spoil the fun. If somebody can have fun that way, go ahead. It's great, but this is not. And especially going back, diving into history, where psychedelics are for, and that's why I think history is a really reliable and interesting resource on how to perceive and have a perspective on the psychedelic experience. It really shows that it's about spirituality, about the discovery of awareness and consciousness. And it's a totally different area where you, when you do this with respect, guided or alone, in the right setting, it produces a completely different kind of experience, and these kinds of experiences done in the right setting, done the right way, produce lifelong insights for a lot of people, lifelong lessons to work on. And I think this is the area where psychedelic experiences excel.
Definitely. And when it comes to the history of it, I mean, it's pretty sad that in many countries, I'm not sure how what it's like in the Netherlands. For example, I grew up in Slovakia, and the education there, they at least mentioned, we did learn about Sumerians, Egyptians, and the civilization, the Indus and Ganga, the rivers, first Indian civilization, that kind of stuff. So, they taught us some about that kind of stuff. With some other countries, they totally skip this.
Yeah. I just wanted to say you're very lucky that you got this, because in our history books, it was only about the wars and about the First World War, the Second World War, and all the great kings and you name it. And we totally skipped the ancient Sumerian times and the Egyptian times and all of these profoundly interesting times. And yeah, it's just shocking that most of the countries, like you mentioned, are teaching just in my mind, the rubbish, the wars over the last couple of 100 years, and those kind of things. And yeah.
So I noticed when I was in the UK, when I've spoken to some people who got their education over there. It's like they maybe taught them some stuff about the Victorian era, and then stuff from World War One onwards, and it's just a tiny chunk.
Yeah.
And back to what you were saying about learning about the history of the use of these kind of things, we tend to think that whoever was before us, our ancestors and the previous civilizations, whether it's Egyptians or whoever, Mayans, that they were inferior to us in every way. They weren't smart enough. They didn't have smartphones like we have, all that stuff. But obviously, we touched the topic of lost ancient civilization, which could have been way more advanced than Sumerians or Egyptians. But it's a whole different story. But my point is, yeah, there's a lot to learn from them, and in many ways, they were actually, I think, more wise is the right way of saying it than we are these days. Because like Dennis Mckenna said on one of the Joe Rogan podcasts, he said that we are extremely clever, but we are not wise.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. We are
So
really good with details and with certain technologies, but
yeah,
if you dive deeper into ancient structures and things like that, it's just mind-blowing where these people came up with, and they were doing things we can't even reproduce today. They have found some ways of layering stones on certain buildings, which we still cannot reproduce today. And it's very interesting to see that nowadays we're seeing our line of history as being a very linear, like we're slowly progressing up and getting smarter by it. But like you mentioned, there's a lot of references and ideas coming from these times, really showcasing that those people were actually much wiser than we are today, much more in tune, for example, with nature, with the cosmos. You find all over the world, you find these structures like Stonehenge and the pyramids. They're all perfectly embedded and correlated with the movement of the cosmos, which suggests that these people had knowledge we have totally forgotten about these days. We can make names, and we are really good with technology, but those things are so lost.
exactly. And who are we to say that our approach to psychedelics, which is just to ban them and say they are super evil, that kind of approach is the right one, and the approach of our ancestors who use these kinds of it is actually a technology, isn't it?
Yeah.
Their use of psychedelics is just mumbo jumbo, some kind of primitive religious nonsense or that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
So
And the funny thing is that this mumbo jumbo brought a lot of peace and coherence with the natural elements, and that's something really coming from those times. That you can see that these cultures are really living in tune with their environment, and that's yeah. If we go back the last couple of thousand years and look at Western civilization, I must say I'm not very proud of where we are right now. So in that way, yeah, which one is better? You tell me.
yeah, but we can also find some examples from history which are not that great, like the later period of the Mayan civilization. I mean, they had obviously like a mushroom cult going on, but they ended up sacrificing so many people, and so that wasn't good.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it has been in dark places as well.
Yeah,
Yeah, obviously. Yeah, right. But yeah, I think at this point where we all kind of recognize that we are on a point which we can no longer maintain. I think that's something many people are sensitive to these days. And I think it's time for us to acknowledge that we have to find new ways to deal with ourselves, with each other, and with the environment, and with the structures at power. And that's something really big as well. It's like we are being, I use the word misguided, I think, by people in power in a way that benefits a few, but not the many, and not the environment. Which is something we need to start to be aware of, I think, as most of our regulatory systems comes from corporations, big corporations,
yeah,
and this is something we are waking up to slowly, more and more. I think, yeah, it's more than time that we start to realize that we need to change some things.
definitely. And there's a lot of dangers that we have to overcome in even just next few years, so we
Yeah,
can make it through this century. But it, I do honestly think that it's not a coincidence that a lot of this stuff is coming up, these days or throughout the 20th century. Because what we saw is that a lot of this stuff, which has been very under the radar or even secret, whether it's certain philosophies, or even these psychedelics. All this stuff just suddenly started popping up, became like mainstream pretty much. You can find books about secret techniques from the Chinese Taoists, and secret teachings from Tibet, and all this kind of stuff. No one knew about ayahuasca in the 1930s or so. Now it's a huge business pretty
Yeah, it
much,
is.
and
Yeah.
a lot of people know about it. A lot of podcasts are about it, and so I do think that it's not a coincidence that all this stuff started popping up and becoming just public throughout the 20th century, and even more now in the 21st century, especially now that we have all this technology where even just like nobody like me can start a podcast and get a following and spread, all these kinds of information just like this, just using I basically started this podcast with just a phone and a tablet, and that's it.
Yeah.
So it's crazy that this stage of time, we have all these tools that can actually help us so much, because a lot of the stuff that you're talking about the politicians and the regulatory institutions, how broken they are and all that. I mean, all these teachings together with psychedelics, they have the potential to really turn things around.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think,
and open our minds to, because let's face it, a lot of people are living just like this, and living in their own little bubble, whereas there's so much more out there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we are too comfortable in a certain way. We're kept occupied with our cell phones and with our work and with the things we have to do, and then we are so tired at the end of the day that we want to have a beer or lie down and watch TV. And the pace of which the world is going is sometimes it really looks like we're held in a sleep. But if we, like you mentioned, wake up to the new ideas and the possibilities, and we start using the tools like the internet to share and to talk about certain topics, I think there's so many things to discover and to actually rediscover things about our history, things about our past, which are very interesting, both on the psychedelic side, but also on the history side, like the ancient civilizations you mentioned. Well, if we put energy into that, I think, wow, we are up for a ride.
Yeah, definitely.
There's so much left to discover, and I think when we put our attention and our very best into it, we're heading to a nice, bright future. Only we have to do it, and that's where it starts. And still a lot of people, and that's what concerns me sometimes, are still really occupied with what they're doing, their job, themselves, their phones, the TV shows, the movies. And I think it's important these days to sometimes step aside and do something for yourself and see for yourself what you find interesting and where you want to learn about. And I think that's something we kind of lost a little bit. We are getting so feeded with movies and programs and things to be doing and things to be following that we tend to forget to think about ourselves and about what do I think is interesting, and what do I want to discover and to contribute. And I think that's something, that process can start when you are able to sometimes say no. Tonight I'm not going to watch a movie. I'm going to write some things down, or I'm going to make a painting or whatever. I'm going to let my creativity flow, or I'm going to read. Or I think that's something people have to do more, make more time to be with themselves and discover themselves and explore themselves and develop themselves, instead of watching one movie after the other and doing work and the usual stuff.
Well said, man. Totally agree. Yeah, in a nutshell, basically, we need to consume less, create more.
Exactly. Yeah. In a nutshell, perfectly. Yeah. totally agree on that one.
Yeah. And definitely one thing, even though, like I keep saying that we don't know what psychedelics are, we don't even know why they are in nature in the first place. Saying that it's just like a defense mechanism of plants or mushrooms, doesn't make sense. I mean, some animals literally just seek them out, animals like us.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, we are doing the exact same thing.
Yeah,
that's really interesting. And it's not just like there are 3, 4, or 5 species which produce these chemicals, but there are just literally thousands of different plants which contain these psychoactive substances. And are they here for a coincidence? Well, that's a large discussion, but I can wrap my mind about something like that being just random. They are there. They serve a purpose. They're already doing that. They're waking people up to their potential, and they're waking people up to do to get more out of life and to express themselves in new ways. And that to me is already showing that they are here for a reason. And so that's very interesting.
Yeah, I think so too. What was it? I remember, I think it's some book, might be in Jeremy Narby. It's Cosmic Step. Someone called ayahuasca the TV of the jungle, right?
Oh yeah, that's a TV screen.
Yeah, like we were saying about people being stuck in the, old pathways. I mean, yeah, we don't know what psychedelics are, why they are here exactly, but one thing that really good is opening our minds and being able to entertain larger ideas. And what was his name?
Yeah, that's.
Can't remember. It was one author who wasn't initially into psychedelics, but then he tried and ended up writing an interesting book about it. I'm sure you know him, but anyway, he explained it really well about what they do. Imagine you got a slope, and you got snow on it where people go skiing, but as they go skiing, they make pathways in the snow down the hill, down the slope, and at some point, once they go enough times, you can't go outside of those pathways. You can only go through the grooves that are already there. But what psychedelics do, they flatten the snow so you can go anywhere you want in your mind, obviously.
Exactly. That's a great analogy. That's literally what it does to the brain. If you look to psilocybin, for example, it literally creates new neurological pathways inside the brain, where normally our brain is used to use certain pathways. When on a psychedelic like psilocybin, it just creates completely new different pathways, and some areas of the brain which are rarely communicating are starting to communicate, and that results in having more ideas being brought up to the conscious mind, and that's something psychedelics are capable of. So I think that this is a great analogy with the ski slope and the snow.
Yeah. I remember speaking to some people, and many times they would say, I don't have the time for this kind of stuff. I don't have time to think about it. I'm too busy and, all that stuff. And it's like, the way I think about it is the universe has been around for possibly 14 billion years, give or take. We still don't know exactly how it started, but anyway, let's say it was 14 billion years of the evolution of the cosmos. Earth has been around for 4.6 billion years. Life 4.1. Again, it gets pushed back to, further and further.
Further,
yeah. Maybe 1 billion years of multicellular life, and we are literally the progenies of the most successful individuals in history, right, who managed to pass their genes on. And you really think that we are just here to live from paycheck to paycheck, to spend our days in a cubicle just doing some random paperwork? I mean, if someone wants to do it, go for it. We live in a free society. You're free to do whatever you want. neither me or you or whoever has the right to tell anyone how to live their lives.
Yeah.
But I really don't think that that's why we are here. I think there's huge value in expanding your horizons and searching, and
Exactly.
yeah,
The answer is already in the question. Like, we still don't know who we are and what we are here to do. And I think there's so much to discover. And living from pay to paycheck is something most of us have to do. We have to make some money. We have to make a living.
yeah,
And that's all fine. But it's really important that in our spare time and the free time that we have for ourselves, that we try to find ways to discover ourselves, our wishes, our thoughts. And they can be different. They can be different from other people's opinions and other people's way of thinking. And I think that's a really important step for a lot of people to take, is to start thinking for themselves and discover for themselves who they actually are. And I think in the grand scheme of things, it's a little bit of a laugh, because we are here at this point, and somehow thinking this is the end point. We are here. We got everything we need. We got the best technological advancements, and
we got everything figured out.
we got it figured out, and it's just it always makes me laugh. It's just
It's ridiculous.
Yeah, it is, and I think, and that's something where psychedelics play a significant and beautiful role, is that they once had an experience, they really open up the broadband of possibilities. Actually, like it really shows you that there are a multitude of ways to perceive and to evaluate the world, and that's really interesting. And there's so much left to discover.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, it's good that we are starting to use them to help out people who had PTSD and depression, anxiety. Lots of studies showing that it's like Paul Stamets, this famous mycologist, said the results are just too good.
Yeah, they are.
Yeah, that's great, but
Yeah.
that's really just scratching the surface.
Yeah, exactly.
I think what's more important is, I think Terence McKenna said it, that psychedelics are going to be to the study of consciousness what the microscope was to biology.
Yeah, exactly. That is Terence Mckenna. Yeah,
Yeah.
that is Terence McKenna.
So they're super important, these ways, and it's going to be really interesting to see what we're going to find out as we because using it for, like I said, for depression, anxiety, that's great. I think that's going to open the door to, because more people are going to have this experience and going to get more curious about it, what it actually is, not what some teacher in elementary school said, but what it actually does and what kind of effects it has. And it's going to be interesting to see what we find out about spirituality
Exactly.
and nature of reality, which we are now finding out it's very different from what most people think, or even what science thought it actually is until now.
Exactly. And the funny thing is that the oldest ideas out of old Buddhism and Taoism and even Hinduism and a lot of different cultures all around the world agree on certain things we are now finding out with quantum physics, for example. And it's funny that you bring this up about psychedelics, because the scientific approach, wonderful. The things they're doing and accomplishing is absolutely amazing. But I think there's a danger to it as well, and that is that that it leaves out one of the most important aspects to the psychedelic experience, and that is about consciousness expansion. And this is going back in the history, in the cultural history. This is the main focal point of the experiences. Always has been spirituality, the discovery of consciousness, the presence of the divine and the spirit realms, the place where things are undiscovered and open for journeying. And I think going forward, we eventually end up at a point where we have to face that reality about psychedelics, and still amazing results being done by the scientific method. A lot of people getting help and assistance by it. But this is, I think, where the psychedelics really shine and really play their most valuable role in changing the way we think, changing the way we perceive the world, and maybe even changing the way we are dealing with it. And I think that's really important for us going forward, where we all massively trashing and misusing the resources, and we totally lost the connection with the planet, most of us at least. And I think psychedelics open up the world where you can reconnect with the spirit of the planet. And that's something really important. I think that's one of the major roles the psychedelic experience has to play in our lives.
Yeah, again, well said. Well, this is the thing that psychedelics do, which no elementary school teacher is gonna tell you, but it is true. They don't show won't see dragons and that kind of stuff. You will see probably super amazing patterns which are very similar to Egyptian, Mayan, Indian, or even Arabic art, Muslim, Islamic art. But the most important aspect is that they dissolve all boundaries. So
Exactly.
the boundary between the inside of my mind and the outside, the boundary between me and other people, the boundary between me and the rest of the universe,
Exactly.
it gets
Yeah.
dissolved. So you like Jiddu Krishnamurti, one of my favorite philosophers, he always used to say, "You are the rest of humanity." Now, an average person who never has any kind of transcendental experience,
Doesn't
and
understand.
a mystical experience, they had no idea what that really means. Maybe some kind of on a intellectual level, maybe they have some kind of idea like, yeah, I guess I have a similar experience to most of other humans, but it goes deeper than that. You know, what we think of ourselves as ourselves, like the labels I put on myself, I'm Elvis, I'm a calisthenics athlete, podcaster, musician, all that stuff it's temporary, it changes all the time. And most people don't realize that. They get really stuck on this idea of identity and
Exactly.
all this stuff. When again, it's a similarity with Buddhism, like we said earlier. It's not a religion. It's more like just like the psychedelic experience. It's more like come and see. You have an actual experience of it, and it's practical. It's useful. So even in Buddhism, the main difference between Buddhism and Hinduism is that in Buddhism, they don't say that humans have something unique, like a soul that's unique to their identity or something like that. They say that no, all your identity, your personality, and all that's way temporary, and you are just a small part of something much larger.
Yeah, just
And
a
when you
fractal.
have the
Exactly.
exactly like a fractal.
Yeah.
And when you have the psychedelic experience, or even if you meditate or you run 100 miles or something like that, you still gonna have the same experience, where you factually actually experience this unity with everything else, with the entirety of existence.
Exactly.
And from that kind of experience, out of that comes a lot of love to everyone. It's unconditional love, not like, oh, you don't agree with me, I'm gonna fucking hate you, but all the rest of you guys, you're okay. It doesn't work like that. It's not love. It's not love at all. It's not unconditional love. Unconditional love is it's pure. It dissolves all boundaries, just like psychedelics do. So
Exactly.
it's interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah,
It's
having
really
this experience is super important.
Yeah, exactly. It's really interesting that you bring for this point forward, because in the end, it's all about perception of identity, right? Like you mentioned, we are so used to identify with the body and with our ideas of ourselves, like you said, Elvis, the podcast maker. But then if you take a step back and look at yourself as part of something larger, and you can actually experience such a thing by taking a psychedelic or doing meditation, it gets revealed to you that you can identify with another level of yourself, which includes more of yourself than only the body and the self where you're used to identify with. And then, like you said, this unconditional love comes in, where you realize that you are taking a step back, all connected, all coming out of the same thing. And if you're able to shift into that awareness, this will bring forward a lot of good things and positivity and understanding and coherence. And psychedelics can help and assist you to be in such a state, and at least to have an understanding of the difference between identifying with the self and identifying with the self on another level, where you identify with yourself as the planet or the people, for example. And this is the shift one can make in its mind, but a really difficult one, because we are so focused on identity by society. We're getting hammered and pushed to be something unique and authentic. And funny thing is, you are already something unique and authentic. You don't have to worry about that. And I think it's one of our biggest challenges to overcome our identity and see that we are actually, when we are harming someone else, that we are actually harming ourselves. And that when we are harming the planet, that we are actually harming ourselves. It isn't just you and me, it is we. It is all connected. We are all coming from the same thing. And I think that's important to realize that.
It's a bit hard for some people, I think, to realize this, because a lot of this stuff is just so counterintuitive, isn't it?
It is.
Like a lot of stuff, even in science, like quantum physics, for example, the way reality works on the subatomic level, it's just totally so different from what we experience in our daily lives. Because we experience everything as localized. I'm localized, kind of like
as fragmented.
But over there, it's then you got particles taking energy from their future self to penetrate a wall. You got superpositions, then you got quantum entanglement, when information somehow goes at infinite
simultaneously
speed.
Yeah.
So it's pretty crazy. And same with spirituality, basically. Or with like we were saying about identity. I mean, it seems like, no, I'm myself and this is me. But for someone, for the listeners who still think, this kind of nonsense, I know who I am and I'm this, this body and this mind. But exactly which part of it are you? Because
exactly.
Like for example, even on a physical level, when speaking about these bodies, like okay, you got this body, but the molecules which you are built of, they're not older than 7 years. They get replaced all the time. So which part is you actually?
Exactly.
it's very fluid.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's hard to say this is me and this is not me, when you get all the molecules get replaced all the time. Your personality is not the same all the time. You are a different person than you were when you were 7 or 17 than you are now. And the way you are now is different from who you're going to be in 20, 30 years, right?
Yeah.
Which part is stable? It's just the you that you are always referring to. There is no you.
Yeah, there is no you. And if you want to comprehend it with the mind, that's always something the mind wants. It wants understanding. Then the best description is to say that there are so many levels of you especially when you dive into the world of quantum physics. You go into quantum entanglement, and you're determining which part of you is the is actually you. You can actually say there is a me, this body, but in the same way you can say there is a me, this planet, there is a me, this galaxy. And if you dive into it with quantum mechanical terms, you really find out that all of these understandings of oneself can be valid. So for the ones who want to break their minds upon this topic, this is a really interesting way to view it. But in the end, exactly who are you? There is no you. That's I think that's beautiful put, if you coming from this angle.
Yeah. Just the only thing that I again for the psychedelic experience that I found out is the only thing that's always stable, because even your perception, whatever you see, feel, that can change so much, especially when you take some psychedelics. I mean, that just a lot of this stuff is just beyond words. It's hard to explain to someone even.
Yeah, I really
But
feel
the only thing that's kind of stable is the fact that there's something having this experience, having this qualia,
exactly.
Observer in
Observing.
a way.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
And that's the true mystery here, because we have no idea what consciousness is.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. I think that's one thing you can say. There's always something or someone having the experience, whether it is here, whether it is in the form of an ant, whether it is in the form of whatever. And there's always the observer, something present. And that's, like you said, one of the greatest mysteries of consciousness, and one we have to dive into.
Definitely. And it's funny that a lot of this knowledge has always been around. Like we were mentioning Taoism and Buddhism. You read Tao Te Ching, which is, I think, a brilliant book. And it was supposedly written around, I think it was like, hold on. Do you know when it was written?
No, actually not, but I know it's thousands and thousands of years old.
At least 2,500 years.
Yeah,
it was definitely, I think there was something like that.
I thought it was over 2,000, something close over 2,000.
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think it's around 2,500 years old. It was definitely before Christ, and Lao Tzu was still alive when Confucius was alive. So I think it was 500 years before Christ. Yeah, around the same time as Buddha, roughly. Google it, guys. But anyway, it's an old book, and a lot of the stuff they are with that Lao Tzu is referring to in that book comes from even from the mythical times of the first emperors, which is like 1,000 years before that. So the knowledge was always there, and yet over here in the West, that's the knowledge we lack, and we somehow can't integrate it properly. And that's what we really need. And that's also what we get from the psychedelic experience.
Exactly. Yeah, that's also a really interesting part of the history, where the best way to explain it is after Christ, 400 years after Christ, the Roman Empire started. And I think that's a period when a lot of knowledge, also from Christianity, like the real teachings of Jesus, got lost. And in name of the church, new ideas and new ways of thinking arose, pressed on onto the people, not knowing that there are so many more things to discover and to find out. And I think that's one of the ways that we got lost, and we lost track of knowledge, which surpasses way beyond what we know now in our modern day and times.
Yeah, a lot got lost along the way. Like again, like we were talking about the ancient lost civilizations.
Exactly.
Now we just You got Göbekli Tepe, which is like, what, 12,000 years old?
At least, yeah.
Yeah. And there's not much left of whatever was there. Yet we have some old stories, like the Egyptians themselves used to say that their lineage goes way further back than the British and French taught us.
Exactly.
So it's pretty interesting. A lot got lost, but I think it's time to take the best out of the past, take the best out of what we have now, combine it and create something beautiful.
Exactly. I think nowadays a lot of people as well are already waking up to these ideas, or at least to spirituality and to self-development.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's a great movement where people start to think about, who actually am I, and what is my purpose, and what role can I play. I think this is happening, and it needs to be a little bit faster, but I think good things are happening, and as long as we keep using the tools like we discussed before, we are going into a beautiful and bright future. But we need to put in the work. We need to converse, and we need to create, and we need to discover. And I think one of the things that make it really hard for us is that we are getting fed up at all of those TV shows and movies, and we are being occupied all the time, which makes time a very precious thing. And I think that's the challenge we have, is to find and create time for ourselves, to open ourselves up to these new ideas and discover them.
And on that note, let's slowly finish off. I mean, we could go for hours.
Yeah,
And we're probably going to do a second episode at some point.
Yeah, nice.
So at the end of every podcast, even in this season, it stays the same. I always ask every guest 3 questions. So the first question, if there was one piece of advice you could give to people, what would it be?
Yeah, actually, what I already mentioned. Take time for yourself to discover, to think, to explore, and to create. I think that's really important. Is that you as a unique human being should be able to create and have time and explore yourself and your own boundaries and your own limitations. And I think it's very important to discipline yourself on that, to make time available for these things. And it doesn't have to be spiritual right away, but I think when you start doing this, you slowly discover that there's more to life than what you knew about. And I think, I think it's really important to start with time, to start to use time efficiently and wisely, and for yourself.
Great. Second question. What does masculinity mean to you?
Wow, we can have a big talk about this. Well, I don't see masculinity as something in sexual terms. Masculinity for me is more the expression of a certain energy both man and woman possess. A masculine energy, for example, is discipline. Being disciplined is a masculine energy, or being after results is a really masculine energy. Thrive is a really masculine energy. So I see masculine more as a force than as something that has to do with sexuality.
Okay, and last question. What do you think is meaning of life?
Wow. What do you think is the meaning of life? That's a question to ask. Well, same answer as before, is we can have hours and hours of discussion about this. But let's make it personal. To me, the meaning of life is to just be and experience and really be present here, right now, with myself, with my thoughts, with my ideas. And that's, at least to me, what life means to me, is to be present fully, with my full expression, wholeheartedly, and with the intention to grow and to strive for love. I think is the only thing I can come up with. So in everything I or you can do.
Great. Listen, I really appreciate you coming on this podcast. It was great talking to you. Final thing, where can people find you?
I'm actually most active on Instagram and on the website. So for more information about psychedelics, you can visit our website, which is www.cosmictruffles.nl. And if you want to find out my Instagram, you can find it through Cosmic Truffles. That's where I post regularly about psychedelic related topics. So that's where people can find me.
Great, thank you.
All right, thank you too for our nice conversation.
Yeah, love it. I think it was a really good way to, start the second season of this podcast. So as always, you can find all the links below in the description. And I really hope you find value in this podcast. Really enjoy it. So see you in the next one.